Thank you very much. Is this loud enough, do you think, James? Might just have a quick adjust of the volume. Whilst James is fiddling with the volume, it's a marvellous turnout tonight. I don't think I've seen the hall so full, so I'd like to thank everybody for coming tonight, particularly those people that have come from a long way. I really appreciate you coming all this way on a Monday night, so thanks very much. What we're going to look at tonight is consciousness. Essentially what I'm going to be showing you tonight really is things that I've come across, a bit like the other talks really, the things that I've come across that I've found interesting. And certainly as this subject goes, like a lot of the other subjects that I look at, I'm very much an observer really, more than anything else. And I've just tried to pick out, as I say, things that I found interesting and package them together into something which lasts roughly 2 hours. I can probably go on a bit longer than that because I've got quite a lot of different video clips and stuff like that, assuming everything goes to plan. So basically, if you want to talk to me at the interval or anything like that, that's fine. But I think we'll just try and get going, and hopefully the sound levels are all right, but I might fiddle with that as we go. We'll see if this works. Well, and I'll just mention the books, of course. Some people will know that Dr. Judy Wood's book came out at the end of last year, and Where Did the Towers Go? The first print run of 4,000 copies is now almost sold out. So I'm not responsible for that. I was mainly with the help of Richard D. Hall and his website. I sold all the 200 that I had. So unfortunately, when I last came here, for those that saw me last time I came here, I think March or April, I think it was, I can't remember this year, I was just about to get books, and I was hoping to bring some here, but now they've all sold, which is good really, because it means the information is out there. So if you want to get Where Did the Towers Go, you currently have to get it from the website. There are very few left now from the last print run. I've got a few copies of my book which you can download for free. And as I say, I've covered the rest of that really. So anyway, right, we'll go on to the main presentation. And I'll just, basically what I'm going to try and cover, we're going to look at religion briefly. And I think one of the key things in all of this that I've come across is something called Gnosticism. I'm sure that many people in the room are familiar with that. And really this is something that I came across a few years ago, and I thought, this is it. This is what it's all about. This is what's been hidden from us. So I'm going to touch on that. I'm going to touch on Christianity and other religions. And then the main bulk of this really is going to cover things like psychology and parapsychology. We're going to look at consciousness-altering drugs, which is a very interesting area. But I would add, I've never taken any consciousness-altering drugs. Quite a few of my friends at university did, but I just decided not to get involved with it. So, I can't really, there's probably maybe other people in the room that have got much more direct experience than I have. I'm just kind of reporting on what I've found interesting. We're going to look at Schrödinger's cat and the observer effect, which is something from physics and quantum physics, which we'll mention. Dr. Gary Schwartz has done some quite interesting experiments at the University of Arizona, so we'll try and play a clip from him. We'll touch on the case of idiot savants, these foolish wise ones. Remember the film Rain Man, because I think they may offer some clues into how certain aspects of consciousness work. And then one of the main things in this that I found extremely interesting is near-death experiences, which really, I think, these are real-world, contemporary experiences that happen to a lot of people. And I think they're very, very important in understanding, what our consciousness actually is. And then I've got something about psychic experiences, such as past life memories, and I've got a video clip, if we get time to play it, of Dixie Uteri. Now, I've probably got over 2 hours of material, so I'll see how time goes, and we'll see how we get on. We're also going to touch on cosmic consciousness. This is where the alien ET sort of question comes in. I've got a slide about that. And occultism. Occultism comes into this as well, and I was very intrigued by Rick Clay's presentation, which came out almost 4 years ago now, about 2012, and how he thinks that that's been used to manipulate people's consciousness. So I'm going to try and get that clip in. And then I've got a couple of celebrities in this who've talked about consciousness, John Lennon and Bill Hicks, who both ended up dead at an early age, which is quite interesting and sad. I'm not really going to talk about, because it's such a vast subject, I can't put everything in, obviously. I'm not really going to talk about things like chakras and these sorts of things, because I don't know a lot about those. There's probably other presentations that have been given here which will cover that more thoroughly than I could. And we're just going to only touch briefly on out-of-body experiences as well. I'm not really going to touch on that very much. So let's start off by looking at religion and consciousness, because I think that certainly all the monotheistic religions were set up to basically control this idea of consciousness and externalise it, when really it's not at all like that. But I've heard it said, and I think this is true, that the only thing common to all religions is the mystical experience. That's where you have this sort of, some people call it a religious awakening or a religious moment, and they feel they've joined with the cosmos. And it's like an awakening. You feel that something is happening and you're part of this greater scheme of things. And it's that thing which is common to all religions, not this idea of a god or a set of gods. And it seems that this can take many different forms. An out-of-body experience, people can have that spontaneously without meditating or anything like that. I remember talking to a colleague at work 20 years ago, and she'd had an out-of-body experience quite spontaneously. I think she had a slight trauma with it, though. She wasn't really a near-death experience. Some people have the notion of meeting God or Jesus, and I just call that expanded consciousness. It's where your consciousness, alters and you have some type of profound experience. Sometimes you're given very significant information about you or your family or a friend or something, and it's those sorts of experiences which can change your life. And this is particularly true of the near-death experience, I think. But they come from out of the non-religious context. I remember watching a documentary where there's a physicist sat on the beach, and he's looking out and the sea's rolling in, and then he suddenly has this feeling of understanding how the cosmos works, and he describes it as like an awakening. But it wasn't a religious experience. And as I said a minute ago, it's where you get this sort of revelation. You feel that you're touched by something greater than you. And I've had small experiences like that in my life. With my family and things like that. And we're going to sort of explore some of that. Okay, so again, I'll come back to Gnosticism to start this off, because I really like the definitions, and I've come across these through the work of a person called John Lash. And coincidentally, he's recently teamed up with Dr. Judy Wood on a couple of radio broadcasts in the last couple of months, which is quite interesting because I came across him independently. And it's interesting that they should end up teaming up. Some argue that Gnosticism was an offshoot of early Christianity. So if you go and read some of the theological works, they'll say, really what it was, the idea of Christianity came first, and then there was this idea about Gnosticism. But John Lash and others argue that Gnosticism predated Christianity. It's actually an alternative to religion. It's not an alternative religion. It's an alternative to religion. My interpretation of it is that it represents inner knowing. It's this inner knowing and understanding that we are indeed not just physical beings. There is something else going on with us. We're not just flesh and blood creatures. And it's when you start to explore that you come across this. Now, in an essay, Lash suggests 3 definitions of Gnosticism. The psychological definition is, gnosis is the intuitive knowing of the heart that liberates us from social conditioning and ego fixation. And I think a lot of the subjects that are discussed here is really essentially part of that process. You're actually exploring things which are not socially acceptable sometimes, or not socially talked about. The inspirational definition is, gnosis is the deep ecology of the human spirit, which I think is a wonderful sentence. I mean, whoever came up with that is just brilliant. In other words, gnosis is to the religious experience of humanity what deep ecology is to our rapport with nature. It's that kind of thing. This is close to the evolutionary definition. In other words, gnosis is a way of encountering the sacred as it is known to the powers that inhere in the natural world, the animating powers of the earth and the cosmos at large, this underlying thing which makes life what it is. In Lash's work, he refers to the archons, a group who came to the earth and began to mess with and attempt to control humanity. Lash refers to the Anunnaki too, but this story is quite complicated. If you look at his website, metahistory.org, you find some very interesting writings on there. So this is where I think it begins to tie into the alien type question as well. So John Lash's work on Gnosticism is very, very interesting to me. I don't know about other people, but I find it very compelling and interesting. And one of the things he came across actually was this. I'm not going to read all of this slide out, but basically he came across this thing called the Psychedelic Bible. And it's the Paris Edwin Psalter is an oversized bound book of about 184 sheets and about 367 pages, counting both sides. Among its many splendours and surprises, the Paris Edwine Psalter contains an image of the crucified Saviour inverted, hanging upside down. This arresting figure appears on the folio page 56 in a supposed allusion to Psalm 33, consisting of 22 verses of typical praise for the Lord, with no reference to a Messiah or crucifixion. So why have they got this upside-down crucifix in this illuminated text? I forget which year it's from. It's from the 15th century, I think. And it's a very rare sort of text that he found. You'd have to go onto his site to find out exactly where he found it, but it's somewhere in I think it's French. The obvious objection here with the mushroom avatar, he talks about mushrooms. Mushrooms come into this. Magic mushrooms, everyone? You know, they've got... yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I remember my friend describing, he was about 15 and he'd taken magic mushrooms and he described the hallucinations to me. Now, I didn't really know what to think of it. The obvious objection here is that the messianic command, take this is my body, my blood, attributed to Jesus at the Last Supper, clearly identifies the body of the Saviour with the sacrament. So if the sacrament is a mushroom, the Saviour must be a mushroom as well. Or so it seems. This interpretation can be easily reinforced by the fact that the Aztecs called psychoactive mushrooms tionati, the flesh of the gods. In my in my unpublished book on the Watson thesis, I indicate what I call the diabolic reflection between Aztec religion and Christianity, noted even by Cortez. So in other words, there's this cross-referencing between some of the Aztec religion and Christianity in terms of these consciousness-altering experiences. Okay, and we all know that, you know, socially the eating of magic mushrooms is frowned upon in our society, but certainly this is where you get into the shamanic cultures and this sort of thing, because all countries have their shamanic cultures. And in this country, and in Northern Europe, they're sort of more centred around mushrooms and these sorts of plants. A mushroom isn't a plant; it's a fungus, of course, but you know what I mean. We're going to come back to we're going to come back to ayahuasca later in the presentation. But what I'm going to look at now is what science has now begun to talk about consciousness in the last sort of 20 years, in more of an integrated way. They've tried to integrate quantum physics with consciousness, for example. But one thing I came across fairly recently in the last year was this chap, Tom Campbell. He's actually a physicist. And let's just see. I think I'm going to just play his clip, and then you can read the text if you want to. I might just.
How do you know whether this is true or not? You know, is this guy just trying to sell books, or is he, is he nuts? You know, what is it? Well, then a little while later, we found Bob Monroe. He lived only about 45 minutes away from where we worked. We went out to visit him. He was setting up a lab to study consciousness. It was kind of a, build the lab and they will come. He really didn't know what they were going to do with it yet. Mm. But we were, a bunch of us from this place where I worked, we're all scientists, like I say, and engineers, and he made the offer. He said, would you guys like to help me set up this lab and do research here into consciousness? And of course I volunteered, and another friend of mine, Dennis Menerick, volunteered. And that's what got me associated with Bob Monroe, out of body, and the rest of it. So I spent the next 5 or 6 years spending 20 hours a week out of Bob Monroe's, equipping his lab, building equipment, and then being the guinea pig, or the test subjects, if you will, for Bob, who was trying to come up with a methodology that he could teach other people. He was very much trying to make the out-of-body phenomena be something that was real, not just something that happened to this guy. You know, he's the crazy old guy that has these funny experiences. He wanted it to be science. He wanted it to be repeatable. He wanted to be able to teach other people to do it. So that was his goal with this consciousness laboratory, and that's what we did. And we were Dennis and I were kind of his test subjects, and he was working out ways to teach out of body with us as the subjects, and we were trying to find out what was going on in the body and mind while the states were being experienced, and then see how we could reproduce them. Well, long story short, Dennis came up with this binaural beat audio, which eventually turned into HemiSync, which is the kind of the fundamental technology that the Monroe Laboratories now uses. It's a simple thing. It's just binaural beats with a difference frequency of about 4 hertz. And anyway, and any of your listeners want to experience that, they could go to TMI, which is the Monroe Institute, on Google or on the web, and they could find it with HemiSync, but that's a little expensive. A cheaper way is just to go onto Google and Google binaural beats. And when you find a binaural beat website, they're free. You can download a beat and just produce a binaural beat with around a 4 hertz, slightly less, maybe 3.8, 3.85 to 4 hertz difference. And what that means is you have a pure tone in one ear of, let's say, 500 hertz, and then another tone in the other ear of 504 hertz, and that makes a 4 hertz beat difference. So
there's even, Tom, sorry to interrupt there, but there's even people doing that on YouTube now, I've seen as well. So people can actually go listen to some of these just by searching on YouTube.
Right, and that's, so that's the inexpensive way, and that'll work fine. Now, this is not going to be a miracle thing. It's not going to suddenly launch you into an out-of-body. It's not that way, but it will, if you listen to it in a peaceful, quiet state, it will help you get into a meditation state, if you will, into an altered state of consciousness that is very similar to what you can achieve on your own through meditation, but that may take you a decade or so to be able to do it as well as you can get it with these beats. And from there, you can do all sorts of things, and out-of-body is just one. So anyway, that's kind of a little bit of, people are always interested in, well, how can I experience this? And so I add that to it. All right, so after years out with Bob Monroe, first couple of years, Dennis and I were doing out-of-body just regularly, following Bob's training. And we still, though, had this question, is it real? Are we just making this up in our minds, or is it real? And we did a lot of evidential things. That was the key. Bob didn't have us doing anything that wasn't evidential, because otherwise you'll never know whether you're making it up or not. So we were going places, seeing things, like remote viewing, checking to see if what we saw was what was there. We would practice healing, using our minds to heal others. We were reading numbers in envelopes. We were doing just about every evidential thing you can imagine. And the statistics said that it was real. The statistics said that it would be 1 in a million or so that we were able to get the information that we were getting. But if you've done this thing, you know there's a big difference between the statistics telling you it's real and you actually knowing that it's real at a deep level. And eventually, through an experience where Dennis and I went out of body together and then communicated while we were out of body, and Bob had the tapes, and I won't go into the detail there, but that was the experience that, to me, there was no logical way out. There was no way to explain that other than the fact that it was real. We were seeing these things. And that kind of got me to the, oh my God, this is real. I'm not making it up. And that was like 35 years ago or so. So I've been working on this ever since.
So that was Tom Campbell describing his experiences when they set up this Monroe Institute, which I've got a slide about later on. But he was basically saying they were doing experiments, trying to do scientific experiments with out-of-body experiences, and he ended up understanding that it was real, and he's a physicist. And I think the other thing that I liked that he said was he relates love and hate to states of entropy, which is a thing you have in physics. Entropy is the property of things that they have a natural state, a natural sort of order of going into a state of more randomness. It's like if you have a bucket of hot water and a bucket of cold water, you can put something in one bucket and one in the other to do useful work, like a thermocouple. But if you mix the buckets of water together, you just got lukewarm water with an averaged out temperature. So you've got a higher entropy state, and things are more chaotic. So he talks about love being a state of lower entropy, in other words, a lower state of chaos.
Basically, you find out that in an information system, lowering your entropy in terms of awareness and being is the same thing, or becomes equivalent to growing toward love. Okay, a low entropy consciousness is love. So, and if you think about that for a minute, you'll say, well, what sort of actions are constructive, are building, are things that are, what do we want to say, more organized, more together, build something, as opposed to relationships that tear apart, disintegrate, destroy each other. Right away, you'll say love, right? If it's a love relationship, that's very constructive. Yeah. Each person in a love relationship is trying to help the other one do better. It's mutually building. Communities that have a lot of love. And out of love, you have things like caring and trust and compassion, and all these things are derivatives then of love. And in that kind of community, well, that's a community that helps each other. You know, one farmer's barn burns down, and all the rest of the farmers come and help him rebuild another one, right? That's a caring thing. It's constructive. Whereas, look at the other thing. You have fear. Well, things like hate and dislike and ego and all that stuff comes out of fear. Well, you have a group of people, and they fear each other. They don't like each other. They're jealous of each other. They all want to grab hold what they can get and keep the other person from getting anything. Then what does that build? It doesn't build anything. So I'm just giving you these kind of social ideas so you can get the concept that love is a very constructive, building, growing concept, and fear is, or low entropy, you know, is a very part destroying, can't really get it together. You know, as soon as one person gets something big in that environment, the other people go attack them and, you know, take it away. You know, it's this sort of thing. It's very hard to build something up in that sort of environment. So we see that low entropy and love go together as mutual consequences. So you have a high, well, let me say this better. You have a low entropy consciousness that is love. So then what are we doing here? Well, we're part of the evolution, right? This larger conscious system. We're part of its strategy to evolve. It's broken itself into all these pieces interacting with each other. And what are we supposed to do to help it evolve? We're to become love. We're to become caring. We are to grow up, basically. Let go of fear. Let go of ego. And now suddenly I'm starting to sound like a Buddhist, aren't I? That, you know, what's the point of life? And, you know, it's to become love and, you know, and so on. And, you know, well, all of this world you see around it, what the Buddhists call it mana or something, you know, it's all illusionary and, well.
And fear is a higher state of entropy. And I found that comparison that a physicist was using that sort of language very interesting. This is from the website. They do have a website, the Monroe Institute. Human consciousness is evolving, so this is a whole institute set up to study consciousness from the basis of science. It's not meant to be a religious, you know, sort of angle on it. Human consciousness is evolving, awakening to the discovery of self. All of us are participants in the evolution of consciousness, the next great leap for humanity. We perceive ourselves to be more than just our physical bodies. We are connected to the universe through non-physical dimensions and a holographic matrix of timeless information. Life itself is not something physical, and death something spiritual. For us, life's experiences have taken on a new significance. We marvel at the wonder of an emerging perception of reality that has been here waiting for us to realise all along. Now, this all sounds good, and it's a very interesting website, but what I found out is that this organisation is linked to Stanford Research Institute, which has some very dodgy things going on with it. I'll come back to them. Because it was really the Stanford Research Institute which was involved with this so-called psychic spies program. This is, and basically they set up a program of remote viewing, and this was in the 70s and 80s. This is a technique which was first talked about publicly in the 1980s, and I've even got an audio recording of a BBC Horizon program about it. So they even covered it on BBC Horizon. I think it was 1983. I've got this recording from. It basically involves, this is remote viewing, not Horizon, it basically involves relaxing and trying to go through a set of protocols to discover information about a specific remote target. I've not tried this myself, but apparently it's not that difficult. Early research involved Ingo Swann, Russell Targ, Pat Price, Paul Smith, Joe McMoneagle, and others. It was at least in part funded by the US military intelligence, surprise, surprise, agencies, and involved somebody called Colonel John Alexander, who I'll come back to. And also General Albert Stubblebine and others. It was dubbed Project Stargate. Some declassified CIA documents now seem to show that Ingo Swann made some extraordinary statements, including about ETs being active on the moon. So you had all this kind of stuff coming out. Now, these folks did not, to my knowledge, use any drugs or other substances to change their consciousness. And in fact, going back to the Tom Campbell clip, he said how you could do it with sound. You could use binaural beats. You know, and they also say that things like the Gregorian chants, if you've heard these, the monks with the Gregorian chants, they use that technique of making those sounds to alter their consciousness. That's what it's all about. And that's what having a church with a certain, you know, acoustic resonance, that it's all to do with altering your consciousness. Now, then, going back to SRI, we had this film called a couple of years ago called The Men Who Stare at Goats, which was actually set up as a comedy film. But later in the programme, talking about the remote viewing programme, they started experimenting with remote influence. They said, well, we can remote view stuff, let's see if we can even do it better in remote influence. And could they induce changes in someone or something just by thinking about it, by directing their consciousness? And one of the things they apparently did, according to the stories, is they attempted to kill a goat with the power of the mind by, I don't know, inflating its stomach or something. That was the arbitrary process which they chose. And bizarrely enough, this was called Project Jedi, so I presume that was done after 1977, which is when the first Star Wars film came out, which is why I say that. In 2009, the remote viewing, remote influence became the subject of a comedy film, The Men Who Stare at Goats, based on a book by John Ronson, who is seemingly partly in the know as regards how this ties in with a wider agenda and set of knowledge. Now, I had some interaction with John Ronson on a forum, and John Ronson was the person who helped get Alex Jones inside Bohemian Grove to film all the occult ceremonies there. So I don't know how it was that John Ronson got in there, but judging by how he did a hit piece on the UK 9/11 Truth Movement, I think in 2006 or 2007, he's part of this network that's trying to keep all this muddled up and covered up, so you don't get a clear picture of it. Now, if it was such a joke, why was Joe McMoneagle awarded the Legion of Merit, America's highest military non-combat medal, for his work on these projects? Joe McMoneagle was this fellow. He's meant to be one of the really, the guys who could do the remote viewing best of all, and Pat Price as well, who died actually a good few years back. So why were the US military investing in this sort of consciousness-related project? They were obviously getting information out, because it went on for quite a few years. They weren't just screwing about. They were up to something. Okay, so moving away from that, I'd like to look again at something more on the science side of things. And I've got this chap here called Anthony Peake, and he's done quite a lot of research into this. I think he's a kind of a sociologist, but he's written a few books about consciousness. And I found it quite interesting what he said about the pineal gland.
How do you personally approach the DMT subject?
The DMT subject absolutely fascinates me, particularly with its link to the pineal gland in the brain. I've recently come back, 2 weeks ago I was over in Cambodia, and I took myself off to the Angkor Wat complex, which is one of the world's most amazing archaeological sites. It's spread over miles and miles of jungle area. But the main complex of the buildings, the Angkor Wat itself, the main temple, has 5 huge towers. And these towers, if you look at them and you know a little bit of the history of the area, they are clearly pine cones.
Yeah.
And of course the pineal gland is called the pineal gland because it looks like a pine cone. And if you start looking into the belief systems of Buddhism, and again particularly the Bon tradition of Buddhism, which is found in Tibet, you will find that they actually revere the pineal gland. If you go into the Potala Palace in Lhasa, associates of mine who I'm working with, an Austrian neurologist and an Austrian psychologist, they've recently visited the Potala Palace in Lhasa, and inside the Potala Palace there are greatly revered large strange objects. And when they looked at these closely, they realized what they were. They were elephant pineal glands. Now, as we know, or as probably you will know, having talked to Rick Strassman, is that that DMT stimulates internally the excretion the DMT causes the excretion of internal endogenous DMT within the pineal gland.
Right.
And I think it's actually now being technically called metatonin by a guy called Beach Barrett. And clearly there is a link here between ancient Buddhist stroke shamanistic belief systems and the whole idea of the power of the pineal gland. Now, I am suggesting in my next book that there are more links to this, and I think it's to do with the very, very deep structures in the brain, something called microtubules, who are small strands of protein that are found within the neurons of the brain. Now, these objects are so small that effectively quantum events can affect them in one way or another. Mm-hmm. And as you're probably aware, there are two guys been working on this, a guy called Roger Penrose, who's an English physicist, and an American anesthesiologist by the name of Stuart Hamerhoff. Now, I'm taking their ideas, applying them to DMT, and suddenly, rather like with my cheating the ferryman hypothesis, suddenly all the pieces fitted into place. Because there's now been discovered, they're actually 99% sure of something called 0-point energy.
Right.
And 0-point energy is a form of energy that exists at absolute zero. Now, this energy comes up and wells up from empty space. Now, indeed, there is a company in America that have actually got a patent to try and find ways and means of generating this energy to save us from the fuel crisis. But the interesting thing is that this empty space energy exists within the brain, because effectively, you know, the brain, like everything else, is 99.99% empty space. Mm. It's a vacuum. And vacuum point energy can be drawn up from there. Now, the interesting thing with this is that a guy called Ervin Laszlo, a Hungarian philosopher-physicist, suggests that the old Eastern belief system of the Akasha, i.e. the Akashic record that holds the records of everything, is synonymous with the 0-point energy field. Mm. So effectively, the 0-point energy field contains the information of everything that ever has been, which will include all the collective memories of everybody that has ever been. And clearly what happens when you access DMT, DMT stimulates the pineal gland, which then stimulates the microtubules within that area to then go deep into the microstructures of the brain and draw up information from the 0-point field. I also think the phenomenon known as Einstein's Rosen bridge is the thing that pulls the information up.
Indeed, a wormhole, basically, right?
Like a wormhole, exactly.
So what he was saying there is that basically we've got this chemical in the brain called DMT, or it can be put into your bloodstream, and this is what's in some of these magic mushrooms. And it then stimulates a change in consciousness. And Anthony Peake and others have said that this happens through the pineal gland in the brain, and somehow this can give you access, as he proposes, to this 0-point field, which is where all the knowledge of the universe is stored. So by some mechanism you can actually get access to that. And well, that's another way of looking at it as well. I mean, you know, a lot of this is obviously speculative, and I think you can come at it from various angles. So some of it says it's nothing to do with, you know, the physical pineal gland. It's something totally separate to that. So, you know, but this, I thought it was quite interesting the way we seem to get at least some kind of convergence in various types of thinking, both from the science community, that they're having to answer this idea of the. I mean, he's meant to be coming from a scientist's perspective, but yet he's talking about the Akashic records, you know, which is something that you come across in outside of the science community, essentially. So that's what really interested me. And I came across this as well when I was looking at a bit more about the pineal gland. And it's René Descartes, who you can see, look at the date, I mean, you know, 400 years ago, whatever it is. The pineal gland is a tiny organ in the centre of the brain that played an important role in Descartes' philosophy. He regarded it as the principal seat of the soul and the place in which all our thoughts are formed, which I thought was quite interesting coming from all that time ago. Really quite interesting. And also, just before we go on to this next section, Rick Strassman was one of the few people to actually get approval from the US government to do studies with DMT. I think that happened in the early 80s. And he's written a book called The Spirit Molecule about those studies. And, you know, these people actually described going off and meeting other. They really knew that they were meeting other entities, non-human entities, and interacting with them. Now, we're going to talk about consciousness-altering drugs, which I'll probably come back to right at the end. But the consciousness-altering drugs, in Western organised cultures, the ones which depress consciousness, like alcohol, are legal, and the ones which raise consciousness are all illegal. Which, you know, if you just look at that right there, you think, no, there's something going on there. You know, it's obvious. But look at this. Nobel genius Crick was high on LSD when he discovered the secret of life. Who's heard of this? This is in his autobiography. Oh yeah, oh yeah. Francis Crick, the Nobel Prize-winning father of modern genetics, was under the influence of LSD when he first deduced the double helix structure of DNA nearly 50 years ago. The abrasive and orthodox Crick and his brilliant American co-researcher James Watson famously celebrated their eureka moment in March 1953 by running from the now legendary Cavendish Laboratory in Cambridge to the nearby Eagle pub, where they announced over pints of bitter that they had discovered the secret of life. Crick told a fellow scientist that he often used small doses of LSD, then an experimental drug used in psychotherapy, to boost his powers of thought. He said it was LSD, not the Eagle's warm beer, that helped him to unravel the structure of DNA, the discovery that won him the Nobel Prize. So there you go, and that's in his autobiography. Isn't that interesting? Now, what interested me was, I think it was probably partly Crick's more open and curious nature, which helped. You know, he probably wouldn't have taken LSD in the first place had he been like me. You know, I mean, I would never take it, but he obviously was open to the idea of taking it and what it might do to him. And I'd just like to point this out, going off on a slight tangent very briefly, but there's a little-known fact about Francis Crick, that he wrote a paper with L.E. Orgel about directed panspermia. And it's basically, I won't read all this text out here, but basically the idea, directed panspermia is the idea that life didn't start on Earth, it was brought here deliberately by some other race. And Crick wrote a paper about that in 1973. Well, wrote in 72, it's published in 73. It's a 6-page paper, I've got it on my website. And he talks about the fact that it seems that life couldn't have evolved here and got complicated. It must have been brought from elsewhere, which I thought was quite interesting. Who knows, maybe he was driven to write that paper by his experiences in an altered state of consciousness, these entities that he may have encountered. So while we're on this subject of conscious and altering drugs, I'm going to try and play a clip from Graham Hancock here. I'll try and get the right one.
But what I'm interested in is certain plants that have been regarded as sacred, as teachers of mankind down the ages by shamans in tribal and hunter-gatherer societies. And amongst those plants, I'm most particularly interested in a brew, a drink that is prepared in the Amazon. We have archaeological evidence of the use of this brew. It's called ayahuasca. It means the vine of souls. Archaeological evidence of its use going back more than 3,000 years in the Amazon. It's probably much older than that. It's a combination of two different plants. One of them is a vine, the ayahuasca vine, and the other are the leaves of a bush, and the bush is called chacruna in the Amazon, and its botanical name is Psychotria viridis. And these leaves contain large quantities of the potent and in this society illegal hallucinogen called DMT, dimethyltryptamine. Now, the interesting thing about DMT, and again, I want to emphasize to your audience that none of these hallucinogenic substances are addictive in any way. It's impossible to become addicted to them. That DMT can be taken and effective in the human body by smoking it, or in fact by injecting it, and it produces a very short 12-minute journey into other realms. But it cannot be normally absorbed orally. So that leaf that I told you about, the Psychotria viridis bush from the Amazon, you could sit down and munch your way through 1,000 leaves from that bush, or you could brew them up into a tea and drink them, and it wouldn't have any effect on you whatsoever. And that's because there's an enzyme in our stomachs, monoamine oxidase, which actually destroys DMT.
However, having done it properly, can you describe the experience?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to add that the other ingredient, the vine, contains chemicals that switch off that enzyme in our stomach. And part of the mystery is how the shamans of the Amazon, out of 150,000 different species of plants and trees, ever managed to find these two plants that put together will give us a 4-hour journey into supernatural realms. And that is what the experience of ayahuasca is. An extraordinary storm of visions is unleashed behind your eyes. You find yourself leaving this world behind and moving on a journey into a seamlessly convincing a parallel universe, a universe that is inhabited by intelligent beings. And indeed, one being in particular, who almost everybody who drinks ayahuasca, it doesn't matter where they come from. They may come from a great city in the West. They might come from the Amazon jungle. They will meet this being. She is always recognized as a female spirit. And she is the spirit of ayahuasca itself. And very frequently, most frequently of all, she takes the form of a gigantic snake, a serpent. Sometimes she takes the form of a human form as a beautiful woman, sometimes of a mass of serpents. She conveys messages to you, messages of deep concern with the environment, messages of the fragility of the planet on which we live, of the fragility of the human adventure on this planet. Everybody who drinks ayahuasca will meet this being and sense that we are dealing with a loving entity here which holds the planet in her coils and exists to protect and preserve this planet, but at the same time has the time to pay attention to individual human lives, to enter into contact with individuals, to teach them. Professor Benny Shannon, he's the professor of psychology at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. Benny has drunk ayahuasca more than 300 times. That's a lot more than I've drunk it. I've drunk it 25 times. He's compiled the experiences of hundreds of people around the world who have drunk ayahuasca, and all of them speak of it as a teacher. It's like entering a school where you start to learn lessons that will transform your life. You examine your own behavior, the minutiae of your own behavior, how you act towards other people, how you may sometimes be cruel or unkind or thoughtless towards others. You're shown the truth about yourself in a very clear way, and you're given the opportunity to change yourself. And if you don't change yourself, the next time you drink ayahuasca, you will be shown those truths again, very clearly and very painfully. And this has happened to me again and again in my ayahuasca experiences. And I like to think, although it's a difficult process to change a lifetime of bad habits, that ayahuasca has set me on a journey to improve myself, to make me a better person, to make me more loving and caring towards my fellow human beings, and which has greatly heightened my sense of the environment, of what is happening to the earth today, of the horror that is being unleashed in the Amazon. It's made me care about these things in ways that I never did before. And most important of all, it's absolutely convinced me that our consciousness is not simply an artifact of our brains, generated accidentally by our brains as we go about our material business, that our consciousness is immortal, that we lived before we came into this life, that we will continue to live after we die in these physical bodies, that there are realms beyond our own, dimensions beyond our own, that they're all around us all the time, so close to us that they interpenetrate us, and yet normally we don't access them, we don't see them, and that's because of our state of consciousness.
So I think Graham Hancock's description there is absolutely expert. You know, the level of detail he goes into, and I think Graham Hancock, the way he approaches things, I have a very high level of respect for, because he actually went to drink the ayahuasca and he experienced it. It makes you sick, this stuff, when you drink it, and it's very uncomfortable to drink it. But he went and actually experienced it. For his other books as well, he's written other books called The Underworld. He actually went and scuba dived all around the world to find these underwater structures, you know, and he actually went and did it. He didn't just listen to what other people had said or done or read their books. He went and did it. So I have a very high level of respect for him, and I think what he said there is really quite crucial. And I think it was also interesting that the experience where he describes, you know, he says you take the drink and you get shown certain truths about yourselves, and then if you don't fix those, you take it again and you get shown the same things again. I mean, to me, that's just like Judgment Day, isn't it? You know, in the Christian or Catholic context, it's exactly the same type of process, really. But yet you're not, you know, you're doing it through a consciousness-altering process. You're not doing it through praying to God, you know, this external thing that doesn't have anything to do with anything. So let's go on to the right. So, and this brings us on to this fellow. I'm also going to play a clip from this fellow, Ron Wheelock, and I've got a note to add to this as well. So, see, he's also, basically what's been happening is, just to preface this slightly, now in the last few years, ayahuasca tourism has become quite a big thing. And you can go to, you know, Peru and places, and say, "Oh, I want to, take the ayahuasca. Please, can you sort it out for me?" And you're allowed to take it in those countries. You're not going to get into any legal trouble because you are allowed to take it in those countries where it's part of their tradition. And this Ron Wheelock, well, I think you'll hear what he says.
All right. Well, you both would understand the Western mind would have trouble wrapping itself around this, especially, Ron, you're saying that you communicate with the spirit world, that there are those who would accept their spirits, but they would only accept certain kinds based on their own religious beliefs. So tell me basically what you do, who these spirits are, what the nature of your communication is, and how you benefit people like Victoria and others.
Well, communicate with the spirit world, it's if I have certain questions or working with other people who have illnesses or seeking something in their life, usually I set my intentions. I say a prayer. I ask that they come, they teach me or tell me what to do. And I never know in what they come in usually human form. And many times they come and speak to me just like in everyday life, but and many times much clearer.
Meaning without drinking ayahuasca or any other concoction?
It's normally when we drink ayahuasca.
And what are they saying? What's the nature of the interaction?
Like if I'm doing a healing on a patient that's sick, I work on the person. If they need to take a certain plant, then the spirits advise me what plants they should take and what kind of a diet and for how long they should follow this.
And do you always?
Let me say that during a ceremony, you look towards the shaman in case you're having a problem. And in most ceremonies I've been in, there's always been the need for the shaman there. And even though he's been drinking, he then must serve the group. He's the one that comes to help if somebody is having a problem. And in Ron's case, I felt him and saw him transform. He's being much too modest with you. You can see how he actually transitions into a facilitator of the spirit working through him.
Transform meaning physically transform or what? How do you mean?
Well, Ron, what would you say? How would you answer that question?
Many times through the plant diets, one prepares their body for other spirits to work through us. And many times other spirits enter me and work through me. So yes, I'm there to help people through whatever problems they're dealing with.
All right, I want to get into the idea of
many times people, not so much physically, but when they're in the state of ayahuasca, and when they look at me, they see me in other forms.
Yes, and I've heard the spirit come through you. Your language changes, your voice changes, everything about you transforms. That's why I use the word transform.
Sure.
I'm not observing him as if he's on display. I'm in the ayahuasca ceremony and experience myself. That's why you need a shaman there, because I certainly couldn't move. If anyone needed help, I couldn't give it to them. So you look towards the shaman, and many times you see how he can help. You watch him help other people.
Yes, exactly. If the place of the shaman, when people enter into these states, if someone was at home doing this and entering into these bad states, there's no one to help them.
That's right.
They're completely lost. Many people are coming for a confirmation that there is more to life than what really meets the eye. Maybe a confirmation of God or something more spiritual. And there's many people that come with many illnesses. Cancer, for example. And I have seen people cured of cancer, but nothing's 100%.
Meaning
Well,
you have cured people of cancer?
I had a lady many years ago that when I was with Don Augustine, she come with ovarian cancer. And Don Augustine said the reason I came was to cure her. And in a ceremony, me and a spirit entered her body and cured her.
And she's alive today.
She's alive today.
So, I mean, curing cancer, I mean, that's quite an achievement for somebody who, just gets people to drink this ayahuasca, or is with somebody at the time. So Ron Wheelock is basically an American guy. He's gone down to Peru to live there, and he guides other Americans who come there, because he can speak the language, through the ayahuasca experience. He's been doing that for quite a few years. Now, the other lady that you heard in that audio, it was one of these things that's really strange when this happens. I was researching and putting together this presentation basically from stuff I collected, as I said in the intro. But this Victoria is actually a lady called Victoria Alexander. And Victoria Alexander is Colonel John Alexander's wife. Colonel John Alexander was the person who went to visit John Hutchinson in 1983 with a team from Los Alamos National Laboratories, where they developed the A-bomb. So what is John Alexander's wife getting involved in all this stuff, and particularly Ron Wheelock? Why are these two appearing on Coast to Coast together when it seems like, well, we know really, don't we? Because John Alexander was involved in Operation Stargate, the remote viewing. So I reckon she's keeping an eye on him and what he's doing, checking he's not going too far out of where they want him to be, or if they are, that they've got the information as to what he's up to. So the people that are running the planet, they know all about this stuff, or whoever they are. One of the things that we've touched on briefly with Anthony Peake was he talked about this idea of this zero-point field and consciousness arising or giving you access to information that was in the zero-point field. Now, really, there's been a lot of controversy over this in the years since this was first published, but there was a thought experiment which was published by Erwin Schrödinger in the mid-1930s, and it was to explain the wave function collapse in relation to large objects. He imagined what that means is that in quantum theory, they basically say that when you observe something, it changes the outcome of the experiment. So the moment that you observe something, it actually changes what you actually see and what the result is. And he actually proposed this thought experiment with a cat, where you've got a cat in a box, and then in the box next to it, you have a sort of little device which is operated by radioactive decay. In other words, each time there's a radioactive decay in an atom or a molecule, you can then, it gives off a particle, and then at some point, the hammer will fall, it will break a phial of poison gas, and the gas will then kill the cat. So, but it's a sealed box. The point is, it's a sealed box, you can't see inside it, you put the cat in, you put it in, you can't see inside it. Now, because the steel chamber is sealed, an observer cannot know whether or not an atom of radioactive material has decayed, and consequently cannot know whether the vial has been broken, the poison released, and the cat killed. According to quantum theory, since we cannot know the cat is both alive and dead for as long as the chamber is sealed, in a superposition of states, it is only when we open the chamber and observe the condition of the cat, thereby collapsing the wave function, that the superposition is lost and the cat becomes either dead or alive. So this paradox demonstrates that observation itself affects an outcome, as an outcome as such does not exist until it is observed, if you see what I mean. So in other words, until you actually observe something and bring it into your consciousness, it's not real. That's essentially what this is saying. And this is, this sort of extends into something called the anthropic principle as well in cosmology. So I've got a little video clip about this as well.
Imagine a universe. A universe. Where time moves forwards and backwards. Where you can be in two places at the same time. Where simply looking at something changes everything. Imagine a universe where you create the reality you experience. Now, imagine that you are there in that very strange universe, because the truth is, you are the observer. You create the reality. Welcome to the Observer Effect.
If you want to see fear in a quantum physicist's eyes, just mention the words, the measurement problem. The measurement problem is this. an atom only appears in a particular place if you measure it. In other words, an atom is spread out all over the place until a conscious observer decides to look at it. So the act of measurement, or observation, creates the entire universe.
I wrote a book on special relativity with an appendix which I devoted to perception, and I said that there was an analogy between perception and the way relativity treated things, that you couldn't, according to relativity, everything was related to the way that you interacted with it to observe it, you see, and also according to quantum mechanics. Right?
What is real depends on whether I look and the way I look. And now this is not just a philosophical question. We can see this in experiment.
Scientifically, we call it quantum measurement theory, and the ultimate inseparability of the observer from the observed.
The Copenhagen interpretation basically means that reality is unset jello.
Copenhagen was the place where Niels Bohr was born and where he set up his own institution. And Bohr was flabbergasted by this recognition that everything was possibilities, probabilities flowing and gooeying all over the place until an observer observes and then things come into being.
This means that deeply enough, and you dive down into the nature of matter, everything we know about the everyday world dissolves. There are no objects anymore. There are only relationships. There's no locality anymore.
The meaning of quantum physics is really in terms of giving us a new worldview that shows clearly how consciousness can be and is the ground of our being. In other words, quantum physics enables us to see directly that we can make sense of the world only if we base the world on consciousness.
There is something that we can do in our lives, literally influence the physical reality of our world, and that changes everything. It changes everything.
I think if we keep quantum physics and the understanding very simple for the layperson, that our observation has a direct effect on our world. I think if we keep it very simple, then people can get about the business of beginning to practice the skill of observation.
Everything starts from inside and then goes outside. So you are not pulling things from outside, you are really putting things outside from inside. It is very easy.
So you can see that even in science, people are starting to say that us observing reality changes it. We create our own reality. You've said a few of them saying similar things. I think probably 9, 10 different people saying very similar things there, really, with some subtle differences. So one might argue that consciousness is affecting what is observed. Okay. Now I think probably what we'll do is, we're at 9:05 now, so I think if we have a break, then we'll come back and we'll look at a clip from Dr. Gary Schwartz, or I'll either just go through his research a bit, because it's quite a long clip. But I think if we have a break at this point, you can have a cup of tea and whatever, and maybe come back in about 15, 20 minutes, something like that. Thank you very much, Rob. Thanks very much. Right, well, we'll carry on with this. Basically, what Dr. Gary Schwartz describes here is his attempts to try and do scientific experiments with the interaction of disembodied spirits. And what he basically presented in June 2010 in Explore, which is the Journal of Science and Healing, he had a paper entitled, and you can go and read this paper on his website, Possible Application of Silicon Photomultiplier Technology to detect the presence of spirit and intention. 3 proof-of-concept experiments.
Science is creating new technologies to make it possible to detect the tiniest amount of energy. So, for example, and again we'll talk about this, there's a device called the silicon photomultiplier system, which detects single photons of light in utter pitch darkness, and you can track them precisely. And anyway, and using this kind of technology, with the latest solid-state physics and the latest in circuitry and the latest in computers, we can actually use this to not only detect the presence of spirit, that is, collaborating spirit from the other side, what we now call our sacred promise team, but also these devices have the promise, and we'll get to that at some point about the soul phone, to be actually converted into technology. Sometimes you have to go into the dark in order to see the light. Sometimes you have to go into the dark in order to see the light. And that's what we're doing now with contemporary technology. And that's also what people do when they meditate, when people go into trances. One of the devices that we used, by the way, was the silicon photomultiplier system. And in the experiment 2 of the paper that was published in this journal, that paper included 2 specific alleged spirits. One, HHH, hypothesized Harry Houdini, and the other was this alleged angel. And the angel, the alleged angel, actually did even better than Harry.
Huh.
And in subsequent research, which it will be coming up very shortly, which is probably the most extraordinary research I've ever done in my entire academic career, which now spans a very long period of time. Let me explain that, and your listeners, I think, will really appreciate this. Most of the time when we do research, somebody is interacting with the equipment. There's a physical person present. So I could be doing an experiment, for example, or my research assistant could be doing an experiment, whoever. And the problem is, how do you know whatever you get, whether it's somehow the mind or the energy of the experimenter, and not the energy, for example, of the alleged spirit? It's always a problem. Well, if this device this equipment is like, let's say, a cell phone, you don't have to pick up your cell phone for the cell phone to ring. You can have the ringer off. The voicemail will take the message whether you take the call or not. If there's a real caller calling, you don't even have to know that the caller is calling. So the idea occurred to me, well, if this is true, if the angel is really showing up, or if Harry's really showing up, as 2 examples, and they're really working with us, or Susie, whoever the beings are, then theoretically, if they're really made a sacred promise to participate in this research, they should be able to come into the laboratory in the evening when nobody's present, follow instructions provided by PowerPoint, visual and auditory, mimicking or modeling what a live experimenter would do, and they should be able to produce the same results, even when no human being is present, when no human being knows when the computer has started, because the computer, it starts at a fixed time, let's say at 11 p.m., which is coincidental since we're started here at 11 p.m. Pacific Coast time, and the computer then randomly picks a number to when it's actually going to start the PowerPoint. So no human being ever knows when the experiment is going to officially begin. Meanwhile, these beings, like the angel, have been instructed toward the end of the day with a script, a very warm, loving script, reminding them there's an experiment tonight and they promise to show up. We're treating them with respect, like we would, because we're doing sacred research. And then eventually the PowerPoint comes on, and it will say, for example, a welcome angel, thank you for showing up. And as you know, in the past, the first part of the data, don't go into the chamber. Just stay away. We're collecting baseline. And in this case, we'd be using what's called a low-light CCD camera, cooled to minus 77 degrees centigrade, which is very cold, looking into a pitch-black environment and detecting, literally imaging, getting a two-dimensional picture of the background light. And then it would say, okay, angel, now please go into the chamber, and for the next half hour, please stay there and let your light glow while the camera collects the data, and we'll tell you when it's done. And then, of course, we'll collect the post-baseline. and then they'll be thanked and asked to leave. And what we did was we had this particular angel invited. On some of the trials, the angel would be invited, and on other of the trials, a deceased person would be invited. We were interested, could we detect both, and was there a difference? And then the next morning, the research assistant would come back into the room, and the data would be collected, at which point then we would analyze the data. So remember, there's no human being present. Now, if this really is spirit, we should get the same results, whether the experimenter was running the experiment, physically present, or not. And much to my absolute amazement, and we have a paper that's coming out momentarily in a peer-reviewed journal about this, I ran the experiment 3 times, and after we had done all this pilot research, and we got continued positive results. And the interesting thing was the angelic presence was consistently producing a bigger effect than the non-angel spirit. And this was not with the computer, this was with the experimenter present. Was I asked my research assistant to invite an angel, a particular angel, to come into the laboratory. So, we'd get a baseline for a half hour, and then he would invite this angel for a half hour, and then we get another baseline. You get pre the intervention, the spirit presence alleged, and then the post, okay? Now, you have to understand that, I'm explaining, is that in this very first experiment, it's a pitch-black chamber in a pitch-black room. It's completely dark. And in there, we had like a chessboard kind of checkerboard background that the camera was focused on. And this is the kind of camera, by the way, that these telescopes use to look out into deep space. Our camera costs $40,000. Giving you the introduction to all of this. And everything points to the fact that we can literally measure the presence of what appear to be angelic beings, and we can discriminate them from the typical deceased. All right? They're different. Again, you'll get the details by reading the papers. So, sacred promise, possibility here. Multiple mediums have told me that there are, I call them alleged angels, hypothesized angels, and they're as eager to participate in this research as Harry Houdini or Albert Einstein or Susie Smith or Marsha Eklund. That if there is this greater spiritual reality, it's up to them. People ask me the question, they say, Dr. Schwartz, are you trying to prove that a greater spiritual reality exists, be it deceased people or angels or the source? And I say, absolutely not. What I'm trying to do is to give them, if they exist, the opportunity to prove themselves.
So he's claiming that he's able to invite spirits to interact with his equipment under controlled conditions, and he's able to detect those interactions. That's what his paper is about. And he's written this up in a book called The Sacred Promise. Now, of course, he's the first one to say, well, a lot of people in the scientific community think I'm just nuts doing this. But, what he's actually, the way he's done it is very interesting. And the fact that he's trying to break the borders between science and this idea that we have got disembodied consciousnesses floating around us and being able to interact with us. He's trying to prove that scientifically. Now, of course, some people again will say, well, why is he doing that? We know that that's what happens. We know that this is real. But he's actually, I think probably the only person that's trying to design and build physical experiments to measure this. And that's why it's interesting to find out about. And you can go onto his website, drgaryschwartz.com, to find out all about that. And he also did a recent experiment with a hypothesized Harry Houdini. And he says, in his paper he calls it HHH, but in his oral discussion he says that he thinks this was actually the spirit of Harry Houdini. And he goes into some detail as to why he thinks it was specifically the spirit of Harry Houdini. So it's very interesting. Now, I first came across Gary Schwartz a few years ago because he did some experiments with a chap called Chris Robinson, a psychic. And what he did in that experiment was, Chris Robinson, the night before he went out with Gary Schwartz the next day, he had to dream where he was going to go to the next day and write down a description in a notebook. So he would have a dream, he'd wake up in the morning, he'd write down what he dreamt, and then Gary Schwartz would take him to a location which was chosen from a random set of envelopes, and then they would see what was at that location, like a museum, or I think one time they went to a sculptor's site, and that also is very interesting. And they got a positive result. In other words, Chris Robinson, I think 6 out of the 7 days or something, was able to accurately describe where they went to the next day from having dreamt it the previous evening. So we're now going to take a look at idiot savants, because this is another thing that's difficult to explain in medicine. It's a well-known phenomenon that happens to people, but it seems like somehow they're tapping into a consciousness field to perform these extraordinary feats of memory, and as you'll see here, I'm going to just play the video clip, just 5 or 10 minutes.
The Public Library in Salt Lake City, Utah. It's often said that the mind works in mysterious ways. In the case of 55-year-old Kim Peek, this is truer than most. He's the world's most famous savant, a confounding mix of mental disability and brilliance.
My zip code, where I used to live, was 10003. Where is that apartment?
Lower East Side. Lower East Side.
My office is at 30303. Where is that?
Atlanta.
Kim's remarkable brain became the real-life inspiration for the character of Raymond Babbitt in the movie Rain Man.
Sally Dibbs, Sally. 461-0192.
How did you know my phone number?
How'd you know that? Said read the telephone book last night. Dibbs, Sally. 461-0192.
It's a role that earned Dustin Hoffman an Oscar and brought worldwide attention to the phenomenon of the so-called idiot savant.
Dustin walked up to Kim after he'd spent about 6 hours with us in Hollywood, and he touched noses with him, and he says, "Kim, I may be the star, but you're the heavens."
I was born on March the 9th, 1962.
It was a Friday.
Kim was born with severe brain damage, but with his disability came an astonishing gift, a photographic memory. Like other savants, the mechanism of his condition is poorly understood.
Kim's brain, no left brain, no right brain. He has one hemisphere, doesn't have any separation, and total absence to the corpus callosum, which has to be a filtering system. And he has no filtering system, so instead of 45% to 50% that yours and my brain keeps, he keeps in about 98%.
Against all the odds, Kim Peek learnt to read. Books and the unquenchable thirst for knowledge came to dominate his world.
Last president of the Soviet Union was whom?
Gorbachev.
Longest serving leader of the Soviet
Stalin.
Union. Oh, this is hard. Identify the famous son of Pepin the Short.
Karloman.
The City Library is Kim Peek's second home, and for good reason. He's already read about 9,000 books. Luckily, the library has 600,000, so it should keep him busy for some time to come.
Five years ago, we met an 8-year-old boy named Rex, who seemed to embody in one small person some of the most intriguing mysteries of the human mind. How it is that stunning ability and profound disability can coexist in the same person. Rex was born blind with brain damage so severe, his mother Kathleen was told he may never walk, talk, or do much of anything. And yet he has talent beyond anything most of us can imagine. We were so captivated by Rex that we decided to follow him, to keep coming back to see what the years would bring. The last time we visited Rex and his mom, he was 10. Today, he's 13 and as joyful as ever. But before you meet Rex today, meet Rex as we first did.
Hi, Leslie.
Hi, Rex. How are you?
I'm fine, and hi, Leslie. Hi.
Rex Lewis Clark then, as now, was a study in contrast. Can we shake hands?
Yes.
Blind and full of enthusiasm,
It's good to see you, Leslie.
yet unable to dress himself or even carry on a basic conversation.
Leslie?
Yes?
I did a wonderful job standing on the carpet.
But with everything Rex couldn't do, he could do this. We played him a song he had never heard, with his old piano teacher singing along.
to San Jose.
Remember, he can't see the keys. Rex is a musical savant, one of a handful of people in the world who share a mysterious combination of blindness, mental disability, and musical genius.
Good job.
Amazing.
But away from the piano, well, look. He was easily upset, confused by basic concepts.
What shape do you think that is?
A circle.
And unable to find his way around the apartment he lived in his whole life.
Let's find the toy box.
Music seemed to be Rex's only real connection to the world, to normalcy. And the question was how far it could take him. Well, here he is 5 years later at 13, playing Debussy for audiences around the country. He's grown more than a foot since we saw him last, and his technique on the piano has improved dramatically. But the answer to how far Rex has come is more complex, like the savant mystery itself.
Look who's there. Oh my God.
Rex greeted me with the same warmth and enthusiasm as ever.
Can I give you a big hug? Oh my God.
But he seemed to forget that I already knew his mother.
How long are we going to hug? This is your mom, Kathleen. I know your mom.
Seen her in a few years.
How are you? Good.
Okay, are you ready to learn your new song?
Yes.
Rex still has the magical ability to hear a piece of music one time and retain it. And he's taking that into a whole new realm, singing. We watched as Rex's voice teacher, Angela Rasmussen, sang him a song he'd never heard before, Schubert's Ave Maria, in Latin. We thought the song was upsetting Rex, since he plugged his ears and started making noises.
What do you think?
I think that's great.
We were wrong.
So he now is singing in Latin.
That's Rex. It's so automatic, almost. It's like breathing for him.
So that's just an example, I think. Obviously, one of the people that have studied this is when the brain becomes damaged that some of these things actually come to the surface. And it's almost as if somebody like, particularly with Rex, well, both of them, but particularly with Rex, because most of his brain has sort of been shut down, or a good proportion of it, through the bit that's actually working, he can access this ability, it's like he can access this knowledge of how to play the piano or how to sing, and just do it just like that without, each of us would have to practice for weeks and weeks and months and have all this coaching and may not be very good, but he's able to do it instantly. So it does lead you to this idea that there's something within us which, we can access and give us much greater mental powers. And so now we'll come on to near-death experiences, because I think this is something that's, this has intrigued me since I first heard about it about 25 years ago. And I think a lot of what's in near-death experiences has essentially been hijacked, particularly by Christianity. And there's been a lot of research done into this. I think one of the books that came to the surface was Life After Life. That was one of the first, that's what triggered off most of the rest of it, as I see it, in the scientific community. It's first published in 1975 by Dr. Raymond Moody, and it published a number of accounts of those who had died and then come back. Most people have probably heard bits and pieces about this. But skeptics still claim to this day, and you'll see a little clip in a minute where the initial part is where this woman claims that it's simply oxygen-starved hallucinations. And they try to dress it up nicely if they're in a good mood, because people have these profound experiences whilst having a traumatic experience, and yet you get some psychologists saying, oh well, you're probably just having a bad dream, or you're remembering a bad dream, and they know it's not a dream. Dr. Peter Fenwick, he's a very interesting guy to listen to, and he's based in London. Dr. Jeffrey Long, he's also done a very detailed set of studies as well. Dr. Michael Sabom, Dr. Bruce Grayson as well, and I've got a video clip in which Dr. Sabom appears next. So I think I'm just going to play the video clip because this is very, very interesting, this particular clip. But this is all the stages of near-death experience. Basically, you hear the news that you've come to some grief, you have an accident, and a patient in the hospital hears something like, I think we've lost him or her, or he's dead or she's dead. And then you get the second stage where you hear a noise, some type of noise. And then the third stage is like a dark tunnel. There's a sensation of being pulled or drawn through a dark tunnel at great speed. And this happens in out-of-body experience as well, not just in near-death experience, to a greater or lesser extent. The tunnel is sometimes perceived as being a transitional experience, it's like you're moving to elsewhere. Fourth stage is being out-of-body, many elements to that. Fifth stage is meeting others. You actually go and meet other people that you know, friends, relatives, and this sort of thing. The sixth stage is the being of light. This being then asks the person to reflect on their life and acts as a supportive and compassionate guide, much as Graham Hancock was describing in the ayahuasca experience. Seventh stage is a review. The review consists of a series of pictures or snapshots in 2 or 3 dimensions of the person's past life on Earth. And the eighth stage is the border. It is described as a door or threshold or line which separates those who can return to life from those who cannot. And the ninth stage is coming back. People describe returning in various ways, and some do not remember returning but wake up later and remember the NDE. The 10th stage is telling others. Individuals in many cases find it difficult to talk about their experience and difficult to readjust to their normal lives following the experience. So I'll play this. So you see, you can scientifically study near-death experience, and you can see that there are a number of neurologists who do realise that it can't be explained other than by separating our mind and our body into a separate physical piece of flesh and consciousness. Now, it comes as no surprise to some people. I'm showing them it's all academic, but now that the scientific community is beginning to embrace it a bit, I think it's very interesting and very significant. Okay, I've got a few more video clips, and I think I'm going to just roll straight on to the next one. This sort of covers a different dimension because we've all heard about psychics. Well, again, psychics seem to be able to access certain types of information that we can't normally access in a normal state of consciousness. Now, I saw a gypsy lady in 1988, at which time I was single, and she told me then that I would be married to a nurse and I would have a son and a daughter. She said a couple of other things as well, but she was right on those 3 things. So that was interesting. She seemed to be able to access information about me, which from the future, I mean, that's just extraordinary. And this happens over and over again. A lot of people just say, well, it's just a fluke. There's so many psychics in the world claiming so many things that just by the law of averages, they're going to get a few things right. No, I'm sorry. I don't believe that. Now, I'm going to play a clip about Dixie Yetarian, because she's an extraordinary psychic. This is from a program from 1992 or 93. I'll just play the clip rather than read out the text.
Ring around the rose.
Starting at a very early age, I began to have a lot of experiences that I now recognize as highly intuitive or clairvoyant experiences. I knew things that I didn't know how I knew. Everyone was saying, how did you know that? Where did you get that from? Who told you that? And of course no one had told me, and I just didn't know how I knew. My grandfathers are both Pentecostal ministers, and so I was raised in an extremely rigid home environment. They were really frightened about the experiences that I was having, and I couldn't stop having the experiences. They just came, and I was too young to recognize that that they were unusual.
Dixie, come on in right now.
They believed that they either had to be the result of some special gift from God, which they couldn't describe to me, I was such a little brat, or they had to believe that these were caused by some satanic force.
Get thee behind me, Satan, and be banished forever from the innocent child. Be gone, Beelzebub.
They were constantly trying to exorcise the demons out of me.
Be gone from this child's innocence. Be gone.
As she grew older, Dixie continued to have psychic premonitions, but it wasn't until she became a student at the University of California that her abilities were taken seriously.
We would sit around in the evenings and discuss parapsychology, and that was fascinating to me, that I found other people who were interested in the kinds of experiences that I had.
In the late 60s, Dixie, married and with a young family, was living in Lompoc in Southern California. One afternoon she had a dream which she later realized was a clairvoyant experience.
We were having guests over one evening, and I decided, because I was tired in the afternoon, to lie down and rest before my guests arrived. I witnessed a young woman who was running up the highway. I recognized her because the night before I'd had a dream in which she was the main character in the dream, and that was amazing to me because here was this girl being pursued and murdered, and the dream was so explicit it just really terrified me.
3 days later, the local newspaper carried an artist's impression of the girl Dixie had seen in her dream.
Her body had been found outside of town, and the caption said, do you know this girl?
News of Dixie's dream reached the police. She became a suspect.
They couldn't believe that I would know that she had lost her shoe on the side of the highway. To tell them where it was, they were able to find it there. I was able to tell them where she had been slain.
Dixie remained under suspicion until the killers were eventually caught.
Pretty soon the word was all over town that I had information and had psychically perceived this case, and that I was able to identify the people who had committed the homicide. There were threat notes, and there was an attempt to kidnap my daughter. So it was pretty harrowing.
This is Dixie Uteri, and on KLOM...
Dixie's abilities had now come into the open. By the early 70s, she was hosting a local radio show.
I took my horse out the other day, and he threw a shoe, and I'm just really worried about him. I think he might go lame, so could you help me out here?
Live on air, she applied her unique powers to easing the problems of small-town America.
Michelle on line 2. What can we do for you today, Michelle?
Hi, Dixie. Well,
there was a tremendous interest in this because it had never been done before. I was one of the first to come out of the closet, as it were, psychically.
Dixie, I just really wanted to know whether you could tell me why my mom left, or maybe where she's gone, or, you know, if she's coming back, you know, because I hate to think that I did anything wrong, you know?
Jennifer, I'm getting... What did you
She had a big following in town.
My mom's got blonde hair.
A lot of people called in, and she really helped a lot of people with her radio shows.
She would always find lost objects. She's great at that. People that had misplaced things of value or not of value, didn't matter. Job changes, medical conditions, things that were going to happen.
Well, I do see you and feel you surrounded by a lot of love, Michelle. What does your boyfriend look like?
Well, he's a naval officer. He's got...
The one thing she would not do, and I think she still doesn't to my knowledge, is if there's an imminent death, she won't tell you about that. If it's an avoidable death, yes. If it's going to be an accident, fine.
Karen Ochoa had phoned in to Dixie's show in despair. Her estranged husband had abducted her 3-year-old son, Rick.
The way he had been taken was very scary. So I did something I never do. I promised her that I would find her child for her.
The only thing I really had of Rick's that was metal, and she needs metal, was his tricycle. So we took the tricycle down, and she picked up a lot about him with it.
Focusing on the tricycle, Dixie tuned in to the missing child. She could see him in her mind's eye.
Very, very descriptive images would come to me. And again, when I say images, I'm not seeing something, I just know it, I can feel it, it's seen it within your mind.
After several weeks, Dixie saw the boy on a street corner in Oklahoma City, over 1,000 miles away.
Through his eyes, I was able to read the street sign, so I was able to call her and give her the address, and she went there and got her little boy back.
We made a beeline for Dixie's house once we got home. And when Rick did see Dixie, he goes, Mom, that's the woman that's been in my dreams.
It was a wonderful happening. It was the most wonderful thing that I've ever done in my heart.
So how did she do it? Again, it seems she was accessing this consciousness field, and she was able to transfer part of her consciousness into the little boy and see where he was and read the street signs. That's pretty incredible. And I urge you to go onto her website. There's a 33-minute video that you can watch, and what happens to her is really quite extraordinary. That's perhaps the least amazing bit of the story, amazing though it is. You know, we're starting to think about reincarnation, past lives, and there's whole books and whole conferences about this subject, of course. But I pretty much know for myself that human consciousness transcends death, and it can transcend time. I think if you look at all the stuff that's going on and all these types of things, you can only come to that conclusion if you take it and study it. That's the only thing only sensible conclusion I can come to. And again, this is a really interesting past life. There's I won't say how we're doing for time. I'll perhaps just like to play this video clip because it's two people in this clip. Gus Taylor from the Midwestern America is one example. He has memories of being his own grandfather. And another experiencer, James Leininger, I think he pronounced it, recognised living people from his past, and he named them. And he was in his past life, he said he was James Huston. So I'll just play this clip.
There you go. 11-year-old James Leininger looks and acts like most boys his age, but beneath his playful spirit is a very deep soul.
And I said, I'm really glad you're my son, and I'm just really fun to have you as my son. And he says, I know, that's why I picked you.
When we first met Bruce, Andrea, and James in 2005, his passion for World War II fighter planes was obvious.
I can beat the Japanese easy as pie.
The fascination began when he was a toddler.
The pilot put him on?
James seemed intimately familiar with the aircrafts.
He started doing these little drawings of airplanes shooting at other airplanes or being shot down. Bombing ships, you see men parachuting. Here's another one where planes are dropping bombs. This is a carrier.
The violent drawings were followed by extreme night terrors.
He would just be crying. He'd say, airplane crash on fire, little man can't get out. He laid on his back and kicked up at the ceiling, and he goes, Mama, the little man's going like this. And he laid on his back and kicked his feet up. The little man's going, ooh, 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 can't get out. And I said, well, who's the little man, baby? And he goes, me. I thought Bruce and I were just going to faint.
They questioned, what kind of plane?
Corsair.
Why did your airplane crash?
My plane was shot down.
Who shot your plane?
He looked at me like I was a village idiot. He said,
the Japanese.
Where did he take off from a boat?
Do you remember the name of your boat? He said Natoma.
And his name?
He always said James, but his name is James.
Stunned by his son's words, Bruce tracked down veterans of the USS Natoma Bay.
I wanted to disprove it.
Columbus, Ohio native Leo Pyatt served on the ship.
He asked a few questions about, did I know some of the people? Oh yeah, I remember those people. Yes, there was a Jim Houston, a rather large shell. Just hit him in the engine, and it burst into flames and went down.
It was all real. James Houston, born and raised in the Midwest, was shot down over tracked down James Houston's sister, Ann.
And he goes, it's not Ann, it's Annie. She wasn't my oldest sister. I had an older sister than that. And I said, you did? Who was that? And he goes, Ruth. I mean Ruth.
Annie is what they called me when I was little. Knowing my name and my sister's name, things that my brother did when he was a kid. It's too amazing to to describe.
James recalled his favorite childhood possessions, and when we spoke to them via Skype, they shared one specific story involving James Houston's mother.
Annie had sent James the picture that her mother had painted of James Houston. And when James got it, he called Annie to thank her, and he said, "Where's the one Mom painted of you?" And so she went and found it and sent a copy, and later on she told us that no one in the world except her brother and sister knew that there was an identical picture of Annie when she was the same age.
Amazing stories like that caught the attention of Japanese filmmakers. Not long after our story aired, they flew James and his entire family to Chichijima, Japan, and the site of James Houston's plane crash.
Took a tour of the island, got up on a ridge overlooking the harbor. James said, "This is where the planes flew in the day my plane was shot down."
Without any help, James knew exactly where the plane crashed. They held a memorial service and dropped flowers over the wreckage.
And James just got so emotional and just lost it. And it was just the most heart-wrenching thing.
But when it was over,
it was cathartic.
You know, it still gives me goosebumps to think that we actually got there and we were there and we were able to close the loop, especially for James, that it was something really important to him.
And when they returned, the death and destruction pictures were replaced with this.
There's dolphins and there's the Japanese ship has its flags flying.
At James's urging, they put all of this and many more incredible stories on paper and published this new book, Soul Survivor.
I hope that it helps people understand the meaning of how precious life is, how fast it can just blow away.
The Leiningers say they aren't promoting reincarnation. Before James, they didn't believe in it.
And I really believe that there's a purpose to this story and that the God that created us wants this story told.
And I also hope that it opens people's eyes up to reincarnation.
You do?
Yeah, I hope it opens people's eyes up to the fact that reincarnation can happen. It is a possibility. It's not a lie.
Suzanne Stratford, Fox 8 News.
So how about that? A truthful story from Fox News. That's quite amazing in itself. Okay, cosmic consciousness. Physically, we are part of a greater collection of conscious beings which populate the physical universe. That is also a conclusion that I've come to. Now, I've spoken about this fellow. I'll just cover this very briefly. I've spoken about this fellow before, Wilbert Smith, and I haven't spoken about Les Harwood. But he talked about in the 1950s the flying saucer phenomenon was related to mental phenomena. In other words, consciousness was important in the UFO phenomena because he felt that these craft were controlled through the use of links to consciousness. And that was 50 years ago. Now, this chap, Les Harwood, I can't remember if I got in touch with him or he got in touch with me, but he knew Wilbert Smith, and after Smith's death, Les Harwood was called upon to expand on some of Smith's writings, eventually publishing a book called The Esoteric Self, which was written about in 1988, and it focuses on the role of our consciousness in the creative process. And I've got a copy of this on my website if you want to download it. It's very interesting how he basically argues that we create reality through what we do, and we're actually, the whole con of religion is that there's not this, God, this disembodied God is just, it doesn't exist. We're gods, we're the gods. And we're all the sons and daughters of God. We do the creation. And that's what it's all about. It's not God doesn't have anything to do with it. It's all within us. And it's really interesting how he does it. He's got, again, he comes up with stuff like this. Basic chart of the creation structure. I'm not going to read it all out. But you can see that the structure here, and he claims to have been given this information, by beings that he was in communication with. And you can't just make that up. It's very, very interesting how this all ties together with the notion of Christ consciousness and this sort of thing that he talks about. So I found this very, very interesting. Similarly, Wilbert Smith, this was found in his notes. And this is a sort of, it looks like a scientific graph, but I'll read the captions here. It says, recognition as human, present median state, recognition as divine, spelt with an E, which is to do with what's called the Devic kingdom, which is fairies and this sort of thing. And so he's drawn this graph up about, this state of consciousness. I just found this very interesting. You don't normally see this sort of thing drawn on a graph. That's what intrigued me. The other thing which I came across in this sort of realm where we're talking about aliens and ETs affecting your consciousness, interacting with them, there's another very interesting website which somebody directed me to about five years ago or so, and it's called the Lyricus Teaching Order. And it's got this sort of set of questions and answers. And it says, for example, question 5, what is the definition of the soul? And it says, the soul is literally a God fragment that is composed of a hierarchy of capabilities and functionality that permit it to be simultaneously individuated and whole. And it's got like this block diagram. I've never seen anything like this. It says God fragment, interface, sovereign integral, which I think is a very interesting description. Wholeness navigator, remnant imprint, phantom core, and a soul carrier. And I mean, this is just like, I've never seen anything like this. I mean, where's all this information come from? What's this? I was particularly struck by this sovereign integral. In other words, we're all an integral being, you know, we're all like a whole unit, and we're all sovereign. We should all be able to choose our own destiny and what we do. But then we've got this wholeness navigator, something which is guiding us, you know, and I've certainly felt that I've been guided in the last few years to do things, you know, and I think it's something to do with this. So I think whoever produced this diagram basically knows something. You know, they know stuff that I don't know. So lyricus.org, if you go and look at that, it's very interesting. And then the associated site Wingmakers, that also expands on some of these things a bit more. So, and Wingmakers is really complex and detailed. It's got graphics, music, and they're claiming on this site that what they're doing is they're presenting these graphics like this picture and musical sort of harmonies which are awakening people's consciousness. You know, and I'm not sure. Some people say it's just an elaborate marketing scam to sell DVDs and CDs and stuff, but I'm not sure I agree with that, because there's a lot of stuff just on the website that you can look at. You don't have to pay to get into it, and there's a lot of hidden sections apparently. So, and they talk about the grand portal, the scientific discovery of the soul.
Wingmakers is a step on humanity's path to the 21st century breakthrough, known as the Grand Portal, the irrefutable scientific discovery of the human soul. The Wingmakers materials are catalysts for the expansion of the evolutionary consciousness, a fragment of which is inside each of us. These materials consist of a collection of enigmatic and mystical art, music, philosophy, new physics, and a remarkable story brilliantly integrated from an anonymous creator known simply as James. James has offered the content of Wingmakers as a navigational plan to humanity that describes a mission so grand that it is only now, in the beginning of the 21st century, being depicted. Throughout human history, the Wingmakers have been known by various titles, including the Shining Ones, Kukulkan, Angelic Hosts, and the Elohim. Whatever their name, they are referred to in these works as members of the Central Race, the original race of beings that evolved in the centermost galaxies of the universe. As our universe expanded, these beings exported the master DNA templates from the more evolved ancient galaxies to those that were in development or incubation. Within the Central Race is a teaching order whose name is Lyricus. Lyricus is a mystical order of teachers who are responsible for the evolutionary progress of the human species and, above all, for helping humanity scientifically discover the true structure of the human soul and apply this discovery in order to create a more profound culture and noble purpose for our species. Lyricus could be likened to the Jesuits or the Tibetan monks of the Central Race. They bear responsibility for shepherding a humanoid species to the Grand Portal and thereby indoctrinating the species as a whole into the broader network of the intelligent, interconnected universe. This undertaking demands an expansive agenda, encompassing genetics at its core, and 6 additional disciplines that collectively propel humanity to discover its own animating life force and the subtle vibratory fields in which it operates. Lyricus employs a variety of sensory data streams to awaken a species, ranging from music, books, art, science, and mythology. Generally, these are isolated expressions, but as the species draws closer to the grand portal, the sensory data streams are increasingly integrated, encoded, and represent potent forces for the expansion of consciousness. Wingmakers is an expression of an encoded sensory data stream that is designed to help in the awakening process of those individuals incarnating in ever-increasing numbers over the next 3 generations. The Wingmaker sites, each of the 7, will be translated in a specific order. Each site carries a central theme that is connected to the 7 disciplines of Lyricus. These 7 disciplines, collectively, represent the knowledge system that will make possible the discovery of the grand portal. Wingmakers.com is part of the mythological expression of Lyricus that typically accompanies its first exterior expression within a species. It announces its initial approach as it treads softly among the species to which it serves. It is the symbolic hand of our future selves, offering each of us an inner map leading to our true identity, not only as individuals, but also as a species. We have only to receive this map, study it, and allow it to recode our innate spiritual quest. As surely as light draws the eye in a sea of darkness, so too do these materials draw the soul.
So we've covered a bit about the alien and ET influence and this sort of thing, which is significant, I think. You can't just blow it off, some of the experiences that people have had. But I think what's going on now, particularly with things like 9/11, I think somebody is trying to hijack our consciousness, our collective consciousness, and use it for their own purposes. I think that's what's going on with all these events in the world. And Rick Clay talked about this. And I'm just going to play the video clip. But Rick Clay basically... he posted some research in 2008, and he talks about Zionism and this sort of thing, and he talks about the 2012 Olympics a lot. His research connected occultism, symbolism, and a possible messianic event to con the public in relation to the 2012 Olympics. And he came onto the scene, I think, in mid-2008, maybe early 2008, but by September 2008 he was dead. He was only 26. I'll play the video clip.
So anyhow, this occult symbolism, it works on a dual level. You know, like optical illusions, for instance. You can now look at a picture and do you see the old woman or do you see the young woman?
Yeah.
It's got the duality, same as everything else when it comes down to religion.
Yeah.
Most people are attuned to see one thing, but it actually means another thing as well. But it depends which version you want to go with. There's two ways to look at it. My opinion on everything with the occult is that it's working on a different plane outside of the 5 sense human reality. It's something that's working in the subconscious.
Yeah.
And going on that principle of mind before matter universe, when you're looking at this occult symbolism, and if one person is, say, looking at the Schweppes logo, and they're drinking Schweppes, and they're buying into this logo, they're buying into the brand, they're buying into all of it, they think they're just buying into a great drink. But they're also buying into this other thing. They're buying into this messianic event. And essentially, if you think about this mind before matter universe, if this occult symbology is working on the subconscious, and it's working on the subconscious of a global population, then it's got the ability to still bring itself forward into matter. Do you know what I mean?
So it's what you're saying is that with the help of all these knowing people, so to speak, this is propelled forward. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. For instance, like when someone goes to a McDonald's and they buy into the McDonald's, you know how clever they got that anyhow. 'Cause it's beautiful. But when they're going in and they're buying those McDonald's, they're also, you know, they're buying into the alternate thing, which is the symbol of, you know, this messianic event on the top of the pyramid. You know, it's empowering it. It's building it into the subconscious, and that subconscious can precipitate into matter at the right time. A book called The Secret History of the World by Jonathan Black. It's an esoteric secret history of the world, and this particular book states how that since the early days, we're getting more and more ingrained in matter. We're moving, like everyone thinks of evolution in a material sense, but consciousness has equally gone through an evolution, moving from the spirit, drawing itself down into material matter over time. And so, for instance, when you listen to the Egyptian stories of Zeb Tepi the first time, and the state that the gods ruled the earth, or ruled Egypt, sorry, and then the gods retracted, so they built statues, effigies for people to worship to. And then eventually, after the gods had retracted so much, the pharaohs then ruled the earth for the gods, or ruled Egypt for the gods. And then, essentially, you know, went from statue worship to idol worship into what we're currently at. We're at celebrity star worship.
Well,
pop
there you
idol.
go. Yeah.
Yeah, do you know what I mean? It's the same thing. Madonna, all this lot. It's all part of the same thing.
Well, exactly. And, yeah. Oh, sorry. Continue.
But my thing is that obviously the Egyptian power structure that was in place then has never died out. Basically, I've got this kind of feeling that as we're approaching 2012, we're obviously approaching some kind of new cosmological energy of some sort.
Yeah.
You know, something involving the universe, which it's probably far too great for any of us to really comprehend at the moment. But working on the mind before matter idea, basically. I envisage what's going on as we're moving closer to this state and we're getting closer to this energy all the time. Manifestation time between kind of, you know, thoughts and manifestation creating themselves into matter is getting shorter.
Because we are being drawn toward the attractor through shorter and shorter epochs. And not only must the entire last 4,000 years of history be compressed into this 67-year period from 1945 to 2012, but there is a 384-day period preceding December 22nd, 2012, when the last 67 years and the last 4,300 years have to be compressed into that. Then there's a final 6-day period when all of these things are compressed again. And so do you see what's happening? The spiral is tightening as it goes faster and faster. The resonances are impinging. The thing is getting nuttier and nuttier and nuttier as computers link all cultures together, all informational barriers dissolve. Everything is becoming connected to everything else. Not only everything in the present moment, but all past moments as well are being drawn, compressed, squeezed toward the production of the transcendental object at the end of time, which is nothing less than all time, all space, shrunk down to an atomic dimension and handed back to us.
So, do you understand what I'm saying? The spirit, the gap between consciousness and our material bodies are closing up, and so eventually we'll be able to create our reality a lot quicker than we currently do.
So he's basically saying that somebody is using our subconscious to their own ends, and they're doing it with the use of symbolism, particularly in things like corporate logos, and that's how we remain trapped in these levels of lower consciousness. And I think this, again, Rick Clay starts to tie it in with things like the layout of Washington, D.C., which is laid out according to sacred geometry. And they've got Egyptian obelisks there, and they've got one in London, and they've got one in Paris. And there's another video I came across since doing this presentation called Secrets in Plain Sight by Scott Onstott, which goes into all of this. So it seems like somebody knows all about this and they know how to manipulate our conscious and our subconscious. So your subconscious is very important, and when you become aware of the symbolism and start to wake up, that's when you can begin to escape this manipulation and this control. And I think John Lennon, I think he was somebody who started to become aware of the power of consciousness and how changing your consciousness could really change the world. And he was trying to explain that, I think, in some of his songs. And I think that is about consciousness. That's about John Lennon's experiences with consciousness. I think that's what it's about. Now, I'm going to close on this subject of consciousness with some adult material. So if you don't like four-letter words, you're going to have to stick your fingers in your ears. Bill Hicks, a very blue comedian, and following his death at the age of 33, he developed something of a cult following, which still continues to this day. And I have a feeling he became more popular in Britain than he was in the USA. And his style of comedy was very hard-hitting, and he talked about, political situations and stuff. But he had an unusual part of his act. In fact, he had sort of fairly regular blue comedy mixed in with political jokes and mocking political figures. But then he'd go into this routine about consciousness and oneness and this sort of thing. And I think I can think of no better way of ending this presentation than with Bill Hicks. So I've got a couple of clips of him joined together, which is about 3 or 4 minutes. I think he got it. He knew what it's like to be here on planet Earth. And I think he really sort of put this in such a fantastic nutshell.
There is a point. Is there a point to all this? Let's find a point. Is there a point to my act? I would say there is. I have to. And we kill those people. Shut him up. We have a lot invested in this ride. Shut him up. Look at my furrows of worry. Look at my big bank account and my family. This has to be real. It's just a ride. But we always kill those good guys who try and tell us that. You ever notice that? And let the demons run amok? But it doesn't matter because to a better ride. Take all that money we spend on weapons and defense each year and instead spend it feeding, clothing, and educating the poor of the world, which it would many times.
So we can explore space, inner and outer, in peace forever. I wonder if that's why Bill Hicks was dead at the age of 33, because he was going around getting very popular saying stuff like that. Because it's very, very dangerous to the people who run the planet, whoever they are, when you've got people like that going around and saying that stuff. So that's it, basically, that's the end, and I hope you've got something from it, and thank you very much for listening, and remember, it's just a ride.